Okay, I think we have most people now. So, as I mentioned, I'm Brenda O'Sullivan, Marketing Manager with Channel Mechanics, and you're very welcome to our webinar today, Best Practices in Channel Incentives. If this is your first time at a Channel Mechanics webinar, we're delighted you could join us. Before we begin, just a couple of points to note. We will host a Q&A session at the end, so if you have a question for the panel, please submit via the question panel, and we'll answer as many as we can towards the end. Also, we'll be running a number of polls throughout the webinar, and it would be terrific if you would participate. The results will be shared later. And lastly, we're recording the webinar, so it will be available to download on channelmechanics.com from tomorrow, or just pop me an email and I'll forward the link. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's panel. We're delighted to welcome special guest Mike Kelly, founder of the Channel Institute. For more than 20 years, Mike has consulted with channel organizations at many of the world's leading technology companies, providing him with unique insights into the best and not so best practices in the channel profession worldwide. And our very own Kenneth Fox, CEO of Channel Mechanics. Kenneth is a channel advocate with over 20 years' experience in the ICT space, having worked for industry giants including IBM, APC, Nortel, and Avaya. His expertise covers global channel strategy, channel program development, channel enablement, and of course, channel incentives. So with that, I'm going to pass you over to Mike and Kenneth. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Brenda, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Firstly, let me give you a quick overview about the Channel Institute. So the Channel Institute is a training and certification body for the business side of the channel. And we're very much industry focused, and especially on the technology industry. So our courses are all reviewed and then approved by some of the most senior channel thought leaders at the largest technology employers around the world. Our courses are 100% online, and before anybody can become a certified channel manager or channel marketer with the Channel Institute, they'll need to complete an exam and get at least a 70% rate. So we currently offer 3 certificate courses: certificate in channel management, certificate in channel marketing, and a certificate in digital co-marketing. Now let me pass over to Kenneth.
Thanks very much, Mike, and thanks to our audience for joining. Appreciate your time and interest in this topic. So first, I'll just share a little bit about Channel Mechanics, and then we'll dive into the actual webinar itself. So as Brenda said, I'm a channel practitioner of too many years. Been doing this pretty much all of my career, primarily in the high-tech industry, but we have veered out into other industries. As we say, the channel is the channel. The reason we set up the company was really to provide a service or a platform to companies who go to market through the channel, and basically make things like incentives a lot easier to implement. Our platform really centers around channel programs, getting the right offer to the right partner at the right time, basically, and it's all centered on ease of doing business. So everybody that's involved in our company are steeped in channel knowledge. We have unfortunately hundreds of years of experience in the channel between all of us. Very much a global company. A lot of the vendors that use the tool have global programs, and we cater for all of those and all the differences that occur across the different regions, etc. So that's just a little bit about us, and now we'll jump into the topic at hand. So back to you, Mike.
Thanks, Kenneth. So in terms of today's agenda, we recognize we have a broad spectrum of people on this webinar. Some may be relatively new to the channel, and some probably have more experience than they'd like to have. So there's really 2 parts to today's webinar. The first section I'm going to cover, and that's going to be very much bringing a broad introduction to the concepts around channel incentives and rewards. And when the Channel Institute talks about this area, we tend to bring the 2 together, both incentives and rewards. And then the second half will be covered by Kenneth, where he's going to talk about the goals of incentives, best practices, and also some real world examples. So onto the first slide here. So what are channel incentives? Well, as an introduction to people who aren't overly familiar with this, they're programs that are created by vendors to encourage, motivate, and reward specific behaviors and specific outcomes with their channel partners. And that really is the key. Many people in the industry and in the profession view it as maybe a little bit straighter than that it's simply sales incentives. But really, this is all about behavior influence and achieving the right outcomes with channel partners. So the overall aim of the incentives and rewards is to improve the mix, the reach, or the yield of your partner base. And I mentioned that we talk about rewards and incentives together at Channel Institute, and MDF, market development funds, are some of the things that we talk about on our courses. And there's many different types of them, but these would be 4 of the typical ones. So the first one would be an accrual-based MDF, where partners earn marketing funds on a straight percentage of their license sales. Not too many vendors offer this type of program anymore, simply because it's not as effective. It's not performance based. So it's one of the older methodologies. Another one would be proposal based market development funds, where funds are allocated based on the merits of a partner proposal. So a partner would bring a proposal to a vendor, and based on the merits of that proposal and also their track record of generating growth, that proposal may or may not get approved. Another very common one, which everybody is probably familiar with, is co-op or proposal-based MDF, where both the vendor and their partner fund campaigns or projects together, and again, often based on the partner's proposal and their track record. And then finally, in this model, discretionary funds, where a vendor can choose where to allocate their funds on an ad hoc basis. Apologies, we're having a little trouble with moving the slides through here. So the next one that we'll look at are the incentive types. Again, these are some concepts that you'll already be familiar with. So sales performance incentive funds, typically quite short-term focused and paid directly to salespeople. So it's a great way of influencing salespeople at a partner company. Also incentives for key activities, and this is a very important one, where a vendor will have strategically important behaviors or perhaps new product launches. So other things would be things like lead follow-up is something that we hear a lot about, where vendors are trying to get partners more effective at lead conversion, lead follow-up, doing more demos, perhaps using the buyer's journey more effectively, those sort of key activities. And also then things like proof of concept, where a vendor will allocate additional discretionary funding for upselling or cross-selling opportunities. And now back to Brenda. I believe we have our first poll.
Okay, thanks for that, Mike. That all sounds interesting. So I'm just going to launch our first poll there, if everyone would like to quickly vote. And it is, what type of incentive programs do you offer to channel partners? Would it be rebates, SPiffs, performance incentives, a mixture of the above 3, or if you don't offer incentive programs currently? Okay, I see the answers flooding in here, so I'll just give it another 5 seconds to give people a chance. Perfect. I think everyone has voted there now, so I will pass it over to you, Mike.
Great, thank you. Okay, so this next section is quite important. So with the Channel Institute, many of the students that we work with are often in their first few years around channel management. They may have had lots of sales training. They may have had some internal employer-led training around the channel, but often they have no formal training in channel methodologies and structures and so on. Often they'll come and perhaps have been dropped in to the channel role from a field sales or inside sales role. And as a result of that, they see incentives and rewards purely in terms of its sales effectiveness. But the really important part to these incentives is around their link to helping vendors implement their entire channel strategy. So again, why do we have these within channel programs? It's around behavior modification, modifying and influencing reseller channel partner behavior to align with the vendor's objectives and their strategies, whether it's things like sales volume or market growth or increasing margin. A typical one again would be around breaking into what's called white space, so brand new accounts. And also it's about alignment. So these are very effective ways of aligning the business objectives of both the channel partner and the vendor. And finally, of course, increasing loyalty to the vendor, improving engagement and improving profitability for the channel partners. So some of the possible objectives that a vendor might have in introducing channel incentives. So for example, increasing sales of specific products, whether they're strategically important products, whether they are products that can be used as a Trojan horse to sell in larger products on an upsell or cross-sell later. Also things like reinforcing brand messaging and increasing utilization rates. And of course, the upselling and cross-selling of new products to existing customers. So getting existing customers more locked in to the vendor's technologies. And again, where as part of a vendor strategy, they have strategically important new market segments where they're trying to establish a beachhead. Again, the channel is extremely important in doing that and might get some additional incentives behind them in order to help the vendor achieve that goal. And what is the optimum mix? There are so many different incentives and rewards. We've looked at a few already in terms of SPiffs and then rewards, the different types of MDF. How do you get that optimum mix? And of course, the answer is there can be no generic answer to that. It's always going to depend on the vendor and on the structure and focus of their channel partners. So it will also come back to things like, well, what is your go-to-market strategy? What is your channel strategy and what sort of segments, both market segments and partner segments, are you working with? What sort of product categories are you involved in? And very importantly, what does the competitive environment look like? And what are the established industry standards? Oftentimes, vendors can get quite myopic where they're only looking at their own strategy. And of course, there are structures and systems that can be used to make sure that the wider competitive environment is being scanned and that established industry standards are being taken into account. Whether you want to adhere to them or disrupt them needs to be a strategic choice. And then, of course, standard things like the geographic scope and local regulations, which are particularly important. So how do we go about improving the performance of our channel partners through the use of channel incentives and rewards? One of the most important things that is not often done is quantifying those expected outcomes before investing. This is particularly important when it comes through rewards and things like MDF. Partners must understand what is the target return on investment from this program. And also from a vendor perspective, it needs to be very simple and straightforward for partners to get payment back once they've achieved their targets. Many vendors question why partners won't engage more frequently when there's free money around for co-marketing activities, for example. And part of that is because of the overhead that these large vendors are putting on very small partners. So the cost of this free money is simply too expensive. So ensuring that there's very limited admin is particularly important. And also there is an onus on vendors to help their partners understand projections and build out marketing budgets, build out forecasts, and understand what the return on investment from this program is going to be. Then looking at structure and alignment. So all of the incentives and rewards need to align with the go-to-market practices for each of your channel partners. And by that we mean there needs to be a menu. So some vendors currently are really emphasizing digital. So there'll be a lot of digital co-marketing activities available and incentives around digital. But many of the channel partners are still quite traditional, and a strategic decision needs to be made. Do you want to include those partners in what you're rewarding? So if so, well, then things like events still are incredibly important. And also, each of these different incentives and rewards need to correlate with the phase of the buying process, and especially if you're using things like the buyer's journey. So there needs to be incentives and rewards around creating awareness, the evaluation phase, and also the decision stage. And we already mentioned reimbursements. Firstly, what is a typical reimbursement? There isn't one, so the percentages really do vary widely. But the percentages tend to differ significantly between what we call production, such as ad creation and execution or media placement. And again, where certain activities are maybe less successful. So things like coffee cups and pens and so on tend to get low to no funding, whereas things like breaking into white space, opening up new market segments, bringing in new customers tend to be some of the incentives and reward areas that really do get the higher percentages in terms of funding. And for any vendors on this call, obviously that is where you need to be emphasizing most of your funding in order to align your partners strategically and achieve your strategic objectives. And I think, Brenda, at this point, it might be back to you for another poll.
That's right indeed, Mike. Thanks for that. So we're going to launch our second poll if everybody is ready. And that is, how many incentive programs do you run per year for your channel partners? Is it just one? Is it between 2 and 4? Between 5 and 9? Or over 10? And of course, if you don't offer incentive programs, there's an option as well. So I see a good few people are voting. Thank you very much for that. And just a reminder too, if anyone has any questions at any stage for either Mike or Kenneth, pop them into the question box and we'll definitely get to them at the end of the webinar. Okay, I think everyone has voted there, so I'm going to close that off here now. Thank you.
And I think at this point, it is over to Kenneth for the next section.
That's great, Mike. Thanks very much. Very, very insightful. Thanks for that. Sorry, I'm just trying to chart through here. Yeah. Okay, so again, thanks very much, Mike. So for the for this part of the webinar, what I'm going to cover is primarily 4 areas. The first is around really the why, as we call it. Why should you have incentives as part of your overall program? The second piece I'll cover is, what types of incentives are we typically seeing out there in the market, and specifically who those incentives are targeted at, be they individuals or indeed a partner entity. I talked then a little bit about how best to implement them in terms of tools or solutions, or actually how you construct the program itself. And then lastly, I'd like to talk about some of the results. What are the benefits of having incentives? What are the kind of things we see in the market as a result of having incentives as part of your overall your overall channel offer? So I suppose key message here at the start is, when it comes to influencing partner behavior, incentives play a key role, and then there's various types of incentives. Okay, so section number 1 is, why have an incentive program in the first place? So if I go kind of back to the start of, why do we have a channel program? Why do we have partners, etc.? Typically, we see businesses start life as direct selling organizations. They get to a certain point. It's usually a revenue point where things start to slow down, and this is where they have the light bulb moment to I'm going to switch to the channel, or I'm going to start using partners to expand my reach and revenue. This is kind of why they go to partners in the first place. And it's really important when you construct your channel program or your overall partner program for your partner ecosystem, that you factor into that incentive programs. There's many sub-programs as part of your overall program, but incentives are very much key to influencing the behavior of the partners. So that's kind of one of the whys do we have them in the first place. But you tap into the partner community in the first place to expand your reach and revenue, to get into possibly new countries that you don't want to set up, to get to targeting customers that you can't reach with your direct sales force. But a lot of the times vendors take for granted that those partners are also partners of most likely their competition. They're selling in the same space. A pretty good rule of thumb to use is partners will typically work with anywhere between 7 and 12 vendors, and that's usually a very surprising number for vendors. They often think those partners are dedicated to them and their product line. Now, there are cases obviously where there are, but the majority are working across multiple vendors. So that's kind of when it, which in turn represents the fact you're operating in a competitive market. And typically partners, will go to the vendor which rewards sales. So, again, partners expect to be rewarded for the business they bring to the table. So how are you now going to influence them to choose you over the competitors? Obviously, price and brand are important, but, a lot of these guys are coin operated as well. They expect, to be reimbursed. And then within the partner community, you've obviously got the salespeople who are definitely coin operated, and that's where we kind of kick into the SPiff type offers, if you like, that are targeted more at individuals versus the partner entity itself. And we also see in there that, as we get more and more into the world of solution selling, where the partner is expected to bring a complete solution to the end customer versus just point selling or individual product selling. We've seen more and more over the last 12 or 18 months the fact that referral business is becoming really important, and a lot of vendors are starting to put together referral incentives or referral type programs where they pay for referral business, either directly between partners or directly into the vendor to deal with. There's multiple types of those. But the key there is the why is incentives provide the levers to drive desired behaviors in the channel. Okay, so if you want to influence partners and you're not running incentives, you're going to struggle, because you can be guaranteed the competition are definitely running incentive programs. Okay, so they're kind of some of the whys. There's many more, but that kind of gives you a flavor for it. So the next section or topic I'd like to cover is, what are the types of incentives that are typically used and who they're targeted at. So I've broken this into 5 sections. The first being, the most common one. These are rebates. These are much easier to include as part of your overall channel program. Because rebates are based on sales. You're not going to have an argument with finance. It's kind of seen as a win-win. You will only pay a rebate based on sales out data, basically, or sales in, depending on your model. But catering for both selling through tier 1 partners and tier 2 distribution, often the challenges around paying rebates are the quality of the data that you have to drive those rebates. But typically they're paid to the partner entity rather than the individuals that are making the sales. And I have a screenshot a little bit later in my presentation that gives you an example of one of those types of rebates. What we see is a lot of companies spend a lot of time and resource taking that sales data, be it sales in, sales out, or a combination of both, spending time kludging that together, processing it to calculate the overall rebate. And typically the percentage payouts vary greatly, but typically if you're going to pay a flat rebate, you're talking about somewhere between 3 and 5% on hardware, and then for software it can go much higher. But what we do see in the rebate space is, if you again want to be strategic, you want to influence partner behavior, you can start to tier your rebates. So if you've got a new product, let's say cloud versus on-site, you can pay a higher percentage on those to encourage partners to sell the product, or influence the behavior, the selling behavior, based on the back-end rebate. The second one here in the incentive program categories is around what we call SPiffs, and Mike would have alluded to this as well. So SPiffs are definitely more targeted at individuals. They're seen as an upfront reward type system. SPiffs actually originate from back in the many years ago. I think well over 100 years ago. They originate in the clothing industry. Tailors paid their junior tailors SPiffs to churn out more suits, basically, back in the day. But they've continued on, and they're very prevalent across many industries, not just ICT, but they are very important. We see a great variation in SPiffs, even in terms of geography. We would see them used in the US much more than, say, in Europe or Asia. But again, they're targeted at the individuals, be it in the partner or within the distributor community. And we have seen SPiffs paid out internally as well. So if you have account managers managing multiple accounts, and multiple account managers because you have hundreds or thousands of accounts, we have seen SPiffs used internally in organizations to incentivize the account managers to ensure that their partner base are doing what aligns with the overall vendor strategy. And then in the world of tier 2, it's quite common that a distributor will carry multiple lines, and the vendor will pay the distributor to put their account line over somebody else's. So you're actually paying individuals within the distributor to give you preference, basically. Now, it's a slippery slope. If you start doing that, it's very hard to back out of it, and usually those types of SPiffs are fairly low value SPiffs. You see anything from $20 to $50 to influence people on sales desks in distributors. The next one on my list there is around what we call referral rebates, and really referral rebates have started to come around because of solution selling, and this is where there's a combination of reasons. One might be you may wish for partners to come together. You may wish for one partner to refer business to another partner and reward them, so it's a combined sale. But really the key piece driving it, or the key reason behind it, is that end customers expect complete solutions. They don't expect to have to go to multiple partners to buy multiple products and figure it all out themselves. If you have large SIs, they're going to be involved in many organizations. They're going to be definitely influencers in the large sales cycle. If you're willing to pay them some kind of referrals, then chances are you're going to make more revenue, drive more business out of that. The next one I talk about is around what we call performance-related rewards. Again, relatively new, but can be used in many shapes and forms. And these are around paying. It could be an upfront discount. It could be a rebate. It could be any type of option you choose to pay out. But it's all around performance. So this is where you set goals or objectives, either internally for account teams or salespeople, or externally for your partners community to do whatever it is that you want them to do. And we've seen it used in examples from, I want to acquire net new logos, to I want to increase total revenue by 20%, to driving your partners to take training or certifications, to simply being used for recruiting new partners and tracking how quickly your account managers can get the partners recruited, contracts signed, pre-sales, post-sales, and their first sale, basically. So these are usually dashboard driven, where the partner can see and the account manager can see the goals being ticked off, and then when you reach a certain point, a claim button becomes available where they can actually claim their reward or their rebate. So we call those performance type programs, but they're really all about objectives or goals that you want to achieve for specific activities. And again, these would always be aligned with the organization's strategic direction. And the last one I'll talk about here is not so widely used, but I think it's a brilliant way to achieve new revenue, and especially for companies that want to do what we call a cross-sell or upsell. This is where you create a program, and when somebody sells a product, and I'll use a simple example of printers and scanners. If I'm a vendor and I sell printers and scanners, what we've seen, one example that we work with is they were selling more printers and scanners, and what they'd done was they gave a rebate of dollars, and they called it vendor dollars basically, and the partner is then allowed to use those dollars against buying the scanners. So they were able to cross-sell or cross-pollinate by giving partners rewards in form of their own dollars to spend against their own products. So it ultimately led to more sales on the products that they wanted to cross-sell. And the same goes for upsell. If you're going to drive a migration strategy, an upgrade strategy, whatever it might be, you can use the same concept. Now that can be done through standard rebates or incentive programs, but the one where you start to give out partners dollars to spend with you, and restrict how much they can use those dollars for, is a very useful exercise, and we see it working pretty well out there in the market. Okay, so that was kind of the what types of incentives are typically used and who they're targeted at. Vendor, the kind of categories there I've talked about is targeting them at either the partner entity or distributor entity, but also targeting them at the individuals within your partner community, but not forgetting the people internally in the vendor. It is quite important to target your own account managers, and certainly in larger organizations, it's really important that the account managers are motivated to align with your strategy. Okay, so I think we're going to pause here for a third poll. So Brenda, back to you, please.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kenneth. So now that you've gone to the trouble of deciding to run and to organize your channel incentive program, we would like to know what percentage of channel partners participate in your incentive program. So the first option is less than 25%, then 25 to 49%. Third option, 50% to 75%, or if it's more than 75% who partake. And of course, if you don't offer incentive programs, that option is there as well. So the votes are still coming in. We'll give it another maybe 5 seconds. Perfect, and we'll close it off there and pass it back to you, Kenneth.
That's great, Brenda, thank you. Okay, so moving on to the third topic that I discussed, and this is really just where I'm going to show a couple of examples of how best to implement these incentive programs. And obviously by incentives I mean all of the above, the 5 types of programs I discussed. So I'll just show a standard rebate program here, but there's some important points I'd like to call out about how vendors, how distributors run these programs. And it's one thing running them. It's critical. Partners expect these. They obviously want to be rewarded for bringing their customers to you and bringing their business to you, if you like. It's another thing making it easy for your partners to interact with you, and I think Mike covered some of this from a Channel Institute point of view as well. But ease of doing business is absolutely critical, and the more and more competitive the market gets, the more and more important it becomes. Again, kind of going back to my number of if a partner is working with 7 or more vendors, they're just going to gravitate towards the vendor that's easy to do business with. They can't be spending all day figuring their way around your portal. How do I claim my rebate? How do I know how I'm doing against my rebate, etc. So by providing a platform like this that you can execute your rebates on, and it's very easy for the partner to come in and see something like the screenshot there, which just shows a speedometer at the end of the quarter or the end of the month, or indeed as you go along during the period, you load your sales data at the back end, and each partner has their values calculated. So each individual partner can log in, they can see exactly how am I doing against my target, what do I need to achieve, and ultimately what my payout will be. Now, you know, partners, like everybody else, are in business to make money. Account managers will tell you you can send 100 emails versus having a single dashboard. Partners will be much more reactive to the dashboard, where they can see for themselves how they're doing. Plus, it's much more efficient for you as a vendor or a distributor to put these dashboards out in front of partners. That means your account managers can get on with other work that's probably more strategic in nature than trying to be calculating rebates and telling partners how they're doing against the revenue they're bringing to the table. So, the idea behind all of this is that it eliminates all of those manual calculations, saving a lot of time and effort, and minimizes errors. It ultimately lets you accelerate your time to market. So if you want to run, let's say, a net new logo rebate, and you want to do it for a particular quarter, having a tool to do that really quickly, be very targeted with that, is really critical to doing business and winning that kind of market share, if you like. Ease of doing business, obviously, for all of the reasons I mentioned earlier, just having it there for your partners, making it easy for your account managers to track how their partners are doing. It's no good doing it at the end of the quarter. You need to be able to do it all the way through. It's too late after the quarter is closed. You need to be proactive within the time period where you're still making sales to be able to make a difference. Having the ability to set targets, show them how they're doing against those targets, and constantly, I suppose, hanging the carrot in front of partners as to, if you can get another 10K or whatever it might be, you're going to achieve your rebate. Or you can do things like, we see some of the vendors we work with now, they don't do flat rebates, they do what we call tiered rebates. So, you might pay for the first 100K, you might pay 2%. If somebody can go from 100 to 200K, I'm going to pay you 3.5%. And if you can get above that, I'll pay you 5%. And that could be on, in tranches, it can be on all of the revenue. There's so many different rules to these programs. Or it can get more complicated than that, where depending on the product that you've sold, I'm going to pay you 3, 5, or 10%. And I don't want to pay on services, but I do want to pay on products. I want to pay more on my cloud than my on-site, et cetera, et cetera. So having all of those kinds of rules and having the ability to put those in a tool and display them on a dashboard is becoming, critical to doing business. And certainly the more partners you have, the more critical that becomes, because it becomes an impossible task to run all of this type of information through, spreadsheets or manual type processes. I suppose another one that's pretty important on the front end side is having a simplified claims process. So it's one thing telling a partner I'm running a rewards program or an incentive program. It's another thing making sure that they get paid out on time. It's easy for them to claim their payment, and it's very clear to them that what they're getting paid for, that they can quickly drill into the sales lines that they got paid on, and stop those quibbles where they're ringing the account manager and say, oh, I expected more because I sold more, etc. So again, all of that kind of noise gets taken out of the equation. And you can do, automate things like partner notifications. You've got 30 days to make your claim. You have 10 days, 5 days left. Claims period is closed. And it just generally tidies things up from a financial perspective, that, there is a claim, you have a quarter, you open claims for whatever it is you decide, 10 days, 30 days, whatever, but people aren't hanging around. They get a notification, they make their claims, finance can see how much has been paid out, how much is owed, and then you move on, you close the claim period and get into the kind of diligence that if a partner doesn't claim, they don't claim. And typically those partners that don't claim, we often see vendors are just cutting checks and posting them out to those partners. But when you put this online and you have a solution like this, it's very common that smaller partners or partners that are just dipping in and out of your business and wouldn't be what you would call a strategic partner, they often don't make a claim, and ultimately there's a net saving to you as a vendor on your overall program or your overall channel funding, if you like. And again, last point there is around all of this is really about drive and desired behavior, and ultimately that desired behavior for you is about ultimately growing your revenue, getting your products into the market, creating awareness of your offering. So that's kind of just some a very brief overview on what a rebate program could look like, and just so I touched on the previous section where I talked about the types of programs. I talked about performance-related programs or performance-related rewards. This is just a snapshot or a screenshot of what we would have seen as a typical performance program. And this is where you set objectives. In this case, I think it's like revenue growth, net new accounts, and some kind of training specialization. These are very easy to implement, very effective, as in, they're simple, maybe 3 to 5 goals you set. And again, they can be targeted at partners, they can be targeted at distributors, they can be targeted at internal account managers to, whatever those objectives or whatever those behaviors that you want to achieve are. The nice thing about them, again, is, they're all fully automated. The partner or whoever they're targeted at has real-time tracking and visibility on how they're doing against those. As they start to hit their targets, they get awarded, in this case, it's just some trophies, but it could just as easily be dollars or points that you run a point system to, a bit like air miles. We often see people run point systems, which in turn, create stickiness within the partner base. They just want to keep coming back for more and more points, and ultimately they're allowed to redeem those points for some kind of merchandise or gifts. The whole concept of getting people off spreadsheets and manual efforts to make your organization much more efficient and effective, because it eliminates a lot of errors. Just natural, you're working on spreadsheets, it's just human nature, mistakes will be made. And again, these, I would always advise not to run these programs just to all your partner base. It's pretty important that you decide what kind of performance or rebate program you want to run, but target those at relevant partners. What works for one partner may not work for another, and so on. Not to get too segmented, but not the opposite of that either, where one flavor fits all. It really doesn't. You've got to be able to categorize or characterize your partner base, tag them, and then when you do run these types of programs, you need to be able to differentiate your entire partner ecosystem into different groups, and that could be as simple as by partner tier, it could be by geographies, product specialization, whatever that might be, net new partners, whatever it might be, and you run the relevant programs that drive the behavior in those types of partners that you want to. So ultimately what I'm saying is, get away from the old spray and pray approach, get very targeted with your incentives. It is your money. It is, ultimately a percentage of revenue you're giving up, and you want to, make sure that's used in the most effective way. Okay, so one more for me, which is kind of wrap up, which is I just want to talk a little bit about, I think you're running another poll here. Sorry, Brenda, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks for that, Kenneth. So it's the final poll, and we know that channel incentives can be complicated. And we just want to know what technology strategy you employ to manage your channel incentive programs. Is it on a spreadsheet? Do you have a custom-built application? Do you use a commercial channel incentive program management or a CIPM platform, or is there something else? And of course, if you don't currently offer incentive programs. Okay, people are still voting there. We'll give it another 2 or 3 seconds. I see them still coming in, and then we'll pass it back to you, Kenneth. Okay, there you go, Kenneth.
Okay, thanks, Brenda. That's great. Okay, last chart from me. So this is kind of around, wrapping it up. So I talked about the why, I talked about the what types of incentives, the who you target, and then I talked a little bit about how best to implement those. So what you've gone to the trouble of doing all that. You've targeted your partners, you've set up your programs, you've run your incentives, you've measured them, you've gone to the best efforts of doing them the best way. So, you know, what's the outcome of all of that? You know, obviously you do these things for a reason. You want to incentivize your partners to sell your products at the simplest level, or you want to dictate, you know, their behaviors in the distributor, or drive your account managers to do certain things. So, you know, ultimately the key benefits of having these are, you want to, you know, attract and retain the right partners. I often say, you know, salespeople are coin operated, nothing wrong with that, but they expect to be rewarded, and they'll gravitate towards the, you know, towards the vendor or the distributor that offer them the best rewards for the work that they do. So, you know, you want to reward partners and or individuals for desired outcomes. Typically they're sales, but they could be just as easily training. They could be recruiting new partners, net new logos, getting into a new geography, migrating to a new product set. You know, the list is endless basically. And really, with the kind of tools and systems that are in place, you know, like say if Channel Mechanics offer, for example, we see the vendors we work with doing lots of sophisticated rewards to influence behavior, but doing them in a very simple way, and they're very, very effective. So ultimately, you know, influencing behavior, like I said on the last chart, really be targeted. You know, you have a finite budget, use that budget to best effect. Don't do the spray and pray approach where you know, spread that across 1,000 partners versus the 300 that matter, or you split that budget up and you know, do it correctly. It does ultimately yield a competitive advantage. We see that firsthand in the work we do, that the vendors that are running these types of programs definitely are able to run campaigns. You know, we see, I won't mention names obviously, but we see competitive attacks being launched, you know, running incentives with partners to do displacements of the competition, all of those kinds of good stuffs. But, you know, I'll kind of wrap it at that. But ultimately, that's what having incentives, and those incentives come in many shapes and forms. You know, the 5 types of programs I talked about earlier being some examples, and then within those 5, there's various flavors of those, and then within those you target different. You know, it could be the partner entity, it could be the individuals within the partner, etc. So there's lots of, you know, tiers and layers in there, and there's lots of, you know, rules you can do, but ultimately it's all about influencing the channel to do what you want it to do for you. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you for that, Kenneth. So yeah, we're going to go through the poll results quite quickly, and then I know we have a couple of questions in, and we will get to those after the poll results. So thank you first of all to everyone who voted in our poll. This is the results of our first one. So we asked what type of incentive program you offered to channel partners. So the results are rebates 17%, SPiffs 12%, performance 20%, a combination of the above 32%, and 20% of attendees don't actually offer incentive programs at this time. So Kenneth, Mike, any surprises there?
No, I think it's a pretty good mix, Brenda. You know, and it's be very interested in the 20% to drill into that. But yeah, I would have thought possibly rebates will be higher, but I guess a combination might bring that up. So yeah, very interesting. SPiffs is low, definitely at 12%. Would have thought that would be higher, but yeah, it looks like a fairly even mix.
Okay.
I'm surprised at the 20% on we don't offer incentive programs. I guess when we've looked at other research around that at Channel Institute, it's typically been 10% or lower, but I guess it depends on company size and maturity as well.
Okay, thanks, Mike. We'll bring up the next one here now. So we asked how many incentive programs you run on a yearly basis. So 10% run just one program, 33% ran 2 to 4 programs. I guess that's almost 1 per quarter. 26% ran between 5 and 9. 0% ran more than 10. And we had a few more voters in this last category. 31% said that they didn't offer incentive programs.
Okay. Yeah, no real comment, Brenda. Yeah, that's kind of I think typical enough, yeah.
Okay, perfect. We'll go to the third poll now. and this was around what percentage of channel partners participate in your incentive programs. So at 32%, we have less than 25% of channel partners, at 14% between 25 and 49%, 18% between 50 and 75%, and 14% were greater than 75% of channel partners, and 21% voted that they didn't offer channel incentive programs.
Yeah, so really the, kind of, it's not, again, not untypical, but really you need to be, the target is to drive a much higher participation rate in your incentive programs. That's the reason you do them. Low participation rates, while it means you may not be paying out incentives, it's not really a good thing, because incentives are a win-win. You pay them out, for things you want to do, and more often than not, that's based on sales. So you would really like to be driving higher numbers participating in. You would like to see a much higher number, greater than 75%. But again, it's these are fairly typical of what we see.
Yeah, likewise, these are the sort of numbers that we would often see. It's unfortunate that such a large segment don't participate, but from the channel partner side, we often get feedback that the channel partners don't really buy into the vision behind some of these initiatives, and are also turned off by the amount of administration to both participate and to claim back money as well. So the admin side is often something that we hear is a real problem for partners, smaller partners especially, to participate.
Yeah, Mike, we've had feedback on previous webinars before whereby ease of doing business is always in the top 3 reasons why a particular channel partner will go with a vendor. So that kind of reiterates that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. And we will go to the last poll here then before we go to the questions. We have a few questions in. So the last one then was in relation to what technology strategy companies employ. So as you can see, almost 40% are still on spreadsheets, 11% have a custom-built application, 21% have a channel incentive program management platform, so that's good to see. 4% have something else, and of course 25% here don't offer incentive programs. Any surprises there, guys?
No surprises. We see spreadsheets. That is, that's so common. People are, running their programs on spreadsheets. And the reason, what often happens is people start their channel ecosystem small, which is normal and natural. Excel does works really well. So, you have a handful of partners that grows to 100, next thing it grows to hundreds. That's when it becomes pretty much unwieldy to be doing on spreadsheets. And while it's great and it serves the purpose, where it starts to stymie growth is, when you want to run some of those more sophisticated type offers, you want to tier your rebates, you want to incent partner behavior to sell something other than something else. Trying to do that on spreadsheets becomes an impossible task.
Yeah, one thing I'd love to understand a bit more around is whether how much of those custom-built applications are built on spreadsheets. So that's something that we've seen before, where we're talking to vendors and they have this custom-built application, and as we ask a little further, it turns out that it's a fancy spreadsheet with some Visual Basic programming behind it.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't think of that, Mike. Okay, so thanks to everyone who voted on that. So we're going to go to questions and answers now. Again, if anyone has any questions, just pop them into us and hopefully we'll get to them all. So the first one is from Liv, and Liv asks, or rather Liv says, Mike and Kenneth, thanks for the overview on a topic I find very complex, as we all do, Liv. My question is around percentage payouts. Can you provide typical percentages partners would expect to get paid out for incentive programs?
Yeah, I'll have a go at it first, Mike, if that's okay. So it really depends. So let's talk in the tech world, which is where we primarily operate. So it kind of depends on the products. I'll kind of start with hardware. Typically, we see between 3 and 5%. When you get into software, it can be anything. Literally, we've seen everything from, 15 to 30% paid on software, and obviously margins on software are higher, and people can do that. But there has to be a financial analysis done, Liv, because it depends what your upfront discounts are in the first place and how much you have left to play around with, and that really becomes a financial discussion. How much do you want to give back at the back end based on sales will really depend on what you give away in the first place. But typically, you could, for hardware use, 3 and 5% is a very, very common number, somewhere in between those. And for software, very hard to give you any kind of an accurate one, but it's definitely much more than that. So it is, typically we see it higher than 15%.
Okay, thanks, Kenneth.
Yeah, and just to jump in on the end of it, it also depends on whether you're talking about incentives such as SPiffs and so on, or what we call rewards, things like MDF. So for strategically important behaviors in terms of MDF and discretionary MDF in particular, we'd often see 100% out there. But the key to the answer, I guess, from both myself and Kenneth is it depends.
Okay, I hope that helps, Liv. Next question is in from Barbara, and Kenneth, I think this might be for you. She asks, do you provide back-end application suggestions that automate rebate programs?
Yeah, so that's kind of what we do, Barbara. Thanks for the question. Happy to connect separately, but yeah, we do a whole raft of solutions that calculate back-end rebates, everything from straightforward rebates, flat rebates on sales data, to working to do what we call, which is much more complex, which is back-end credits through distribution, and that's where you're using stock and distribution, and then you give discounts after it's been stocked, and those discounts can vary very, broadly from a special bid to promotion, etc. There's usually, between 9 and 12 types of discounts a vendor could give on something that's already been stocked. So, that is kind of what we do. That's right in our wheelhouse. So happy to follow up with you if you want to spend a little bit longer on it.
Okay, thanks, Kenneth. So the next one is from Armando. Kenneth, I think this might be for you again. Hi, great presentation today. Are there any companies or industry best automated incentive platforms, software-based, you can refer us to so we can avoid the archaic methods and using spreadsheets?
Yeah, so thanks very much for the question. I'm probably a bit biased here, but that's exactly what Channel Mechanics do. So again, happy to get you lined up with one of our SEs for a demo, and we can show you, any amount of those types of programs I covered in the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Kenneth. I can pass you on Armando's contact details if you want to reach out. So next question then is in from Jen, and Jen asks, can you give further examples for point system activities? What are the most successful partner programs doing task-wise for points?
Yeah, so we run points-based. So the kind of ones we see are, maybe starting off with your partner leveling. So, granting points, and those points then convert into the tiers in your program. And then, another example is using points instead of dollars for your rewards. And, we see companies like, GRS under the Carlton Group, who we work directly with to provide the system that you can spend your points in. Another one would be Xstream or XTRM, they're pronounced. They provide what's called online wallets to do this kind of stuff where you can push rewards out into those wallets. And again, we interface with those guys. There's a lot of, there are a lot of those points-based systems. They don't necessarily calculate the points. Most of them are around redemption, and they basically make their money on the merchandise side of it.
Okay, thanks for that, Kenneth. So we do have a couple more questions in, but I know we're running out of time, so I will ask the presenters to follow up directly in relation to those questions. So I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. Apologies now if we ran slightly over, and to Kenneth and to Mike, are there anything you'd like to say just to sum up?
No, from my perspective, just thanks to the audience. We appreciate your time, taking an hour out. Hope you found it useful, and as Brenda said, we'll share the recording.
Yeah, exactly. Same from me. Thanks everyone for taking the time.
Okay, thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.